Number 12. Jenny Haniver. Salt hangs in the air like dust. At a 16th century port, a stall is packed 3 people deep. On the table lies something half fish, half demon. A shriveled body with wings spread, a twisted tail, a face locked in a human grimace. Up close, it looks worse. The eyes seem to stare. The mouth looks deliberate. Someone swears it came from the deep. It did not. Hands made it here on land. They cut fins, bent cartilage, tightened skin, and dried a ray until its underside turned into a monster. Once it dried, it became evidence of dragons, mermaids, sea devils, whatever the buyer feared most. That is the pattern running through so many underwater monster stories. The deep keeps returning only fragments, and people finish the rest themselves. The first clue is a fake built from something real. Number 12. The monster that was manufactured. You are shoulder to shoulder with merchants, sailors, and men who smell of tar, brine, and old rope. Beyond the quay, masts knock in the wind. Closer in, a hawker talks too fast for comfort. Fast talk is part of the performance. He keeps one hand on the thing lying flat on the boards, as if it might move if he lets go. At first glance, it looks impossible. 4 feet across, maybe less in this particular stall, but broad enough to take the whole table. A long tail trails off the wood. The side flanges lift like wings. The head has been pinched and tightened until the front of the body narrows into a face no living fish should have. 2 dark hollows stare upward. A woman crosses herself. A boy leans in anyway. The hawker says sea devil. The apothecary beside him prefers marine dragon. Another man hears that and improves the story before it has even cooled. He says the creature was taken in a net beyond sight of land, thrashing so hard it nearly tore through the mesh. He says it came up from water black enough to swallow an anchor line. He says there are more. The man behind the table knows exactly how many there are. He made this one. He began with a ray. Or a skate. Perhaps a small guitar fish if the catch was good. He used not the top of the animal, but the underside. That is where the trick lives. He laid the body open on planks, pale belly upward, while the flesh was still pliable. Then came the knife. Small cuts first. Parts of the fins trimmed away so the remaining edges would break into clawed points. The head pulled inward, the mouth distorted, the tail twisted off center. The side portions lifted and fixed so that, once dry, they would stand like wings. If you stare long enough, the trick starts to show. Those are not eyes. The real eyes of the ray are on the other side, above. What you are seeing are nostrils, dried and darkened and placed by human imagination exactly where a face expects them to be. The mouth below has shrunk into a miserable little grimace. The whole body has been bent until anatomy gives up and story takes over. Someone reaches out and touches one wingtip with 2 fingers. It is hard now, leather dry, light enough to hang, light enough to travel. The hawker smiles, because this is the moment the carcass becomes cargo. Tourists can carry fear home. Collectors can mount it in a cabinet. A scholar can buy it and draw it. A book can print it. Then the market stall stops being the end of the trick. It becomes the beginning. By 1553, images of these creatures are already moving through Europe. By 1554, they are still moving. Woodcuts carry them farther than any fishing boat can. The body on the table does not need to last forever if the image lasts for it. Salt the skin, dry the cartilage, invent the tale, and let the picture travel. The hawker turns the monster slightly, searching for the best angle. Instantly the face improves. That matters in a market where belief is sold in a glance. Straight on, the thing can almost fail. Tilt it, shadow the hollows, raise the wings. Suddenly it becomes exactly what the buyer came hoping to see. A natural marvel, a warning from the deep. Proof. Across the crowd stands a man who does not dress like a sailor. He is watching too carefully for that. In 1558, Conrad Gessner is working on the fish volume of Historia Animalium, Book 4. And somewhere among specimens, reports, and borrowed wonders, one of these creatures passes before him. Whether he sees it in a shop or an apothecary shows it to him hardly matters here. What matters is the pause before recognition. For a second, even here, with docks stink in the air and the cellar still performing, the monster works. Gessner steps closer. The crowd has already decided what it is. That makes looking harder, not easier. If enough people say dragon, your eyes begin to cooperate. If enough people say mermaid, the shriveled curve of flesh starts to seem almost human.
The fraud does not fight the imagination, it uses it. So he studies the seams, the raised fins, the tightened head, the bent body, the false face made from the underside of a fish that was never meant to be read as a face at all. A manufactured posture, a manufactured expression. Fear dried into shape. He sees it, and the effect does not return. The hawker keeps talking. He keeps polishing the lie with details. A net, a storm, sailors barely escaping. The usual generosity of witnesses who know a sail is close. But for at least one man in the crowd, the spell is broken. Gessner understands that the object is not evidence of a basilisk or a sea devil. It is evidence of hands. Skilled hands. Practiced hands. Hands that know exactly how little anatomy must be altered before the mind finishes the monster by itself. Now the scene divides. For everyone pressing forward, this is a creature taken from the water. For the man who will publish what he has learned, it is a lesson in how easily the deep can be made to confess to anything. In 1558, he records the method plainly enough to spoil the magic. Take a ray or skate, cut away portions, bend the body, distort the head and mouth, dry it into a marvel. A warning, not an endorsement. Warnings do not kill good merchandise. The stall does not empty. Buyers do not turn into skeptics. The object is still too useful. Real fish tissue. Fake anatomy. A story strong enough to survive the truth and travel with it. Even the name that later clings to it, Jenny Haniver, likely drifting out of Antwerp through English mouths, sounds half local joke, half catalog entry. That helps. Frauds last longer when they sound traditional. You are still standing there as the seller wraps the creature in cloth.
He ties the tail last, careful not to break the curve. The buyer pays. No one is purchasing flesh. They are purchasing a recovered fragment of the unknown. Something from below that arrived already damaged, already distorted, already begging for interpretation. The first monster in this story was never caught at sea. It was printed on page 945 in 1558.
Number 11. Sea Monk. On June 13, 1550, King Christian III of Denmark entered a new political alignment with Emperor Charles V and the Scots, at a moment when courts across Europe were trading more than soldiers and promises. They traded curiosities, gifts, drawings, proof that a ruler's waters had produced something no other ruler possessed. In that world of paperwork and prestige, one of the strangest creatures the sea ever returned found its place: the sea monk. The man who turned it from a Danish coastal rumor into European evidence was not a fisherman and not a naturalist. It was Christian III. Go back 4 years. In 1546, in the Øresund Strait between Zealand and Sweden, witnesses found a body in the water unlike anything they thought a net should ever bring up. The descriptions shift, because they always do. The outline did not. A large fish. 4 ells long in one Danish chronicle, often retold later as around 15 feet. A dark head. A shape like a cowl. An upper body that seemed to resemble a tonsured monk in robes, not just human, specifically clerical. Renaissance Europe did not just see faces in chaos, it saw rank. Christian III would have understood the value of that at once. A malformed fish found by locals is a curiosity. A drawing of that fish sent from one monarch to another becomes certified strangeness. Later reconstructions say the Danish king had images of the creature sent to Charles V. We do not have the body. We do not have a preserved specimen. We do not even have a first-hand scientific description. What remains is the trail left by circulation. It begins, as these things often do, not in a laboratory, but in a royal exchange. The sea monk entered Europe through transmission, not direct observation. Picture the process. The fish may already be gone by the time pen touches paper. Dumped, buried, rotted, or half-remembered. A court artist, or a copyist working from another copyist, listens while people argue over what they saw. One says the head looked shaved on top, like a monk's tonsure. Another insists it had folded fins like sleeves. Someone adds that the body tapered like a habit. At that point, the drawing is no longer trying to capture an animal. It is fixing a rumor in a form fit to send to an emperor. Each line makes the marvel clearer. Each line pushes the animal farther from itself. The image traveled. By 1553, Pierre Bellon printed the creature.
By 1554, Guillaume Rondelet repeated it and gave it an image. By 1558, Conrad Gessner absorbed it into the machinery of Renaissance natural history. 3 major names in 5 years. That is how fast a single coastal report could harden into learned reality once ink replaced flesh. The problem is simple. None of them appears to have seen the animal. Not Ballon, not Rondelet, not Gessner. They worked from reports, and probably from drawings already altered in transit. Even the place names came through bent. Charles Paxton and Robert Holland, reopening the case in 2005, argued that the odd locations garbled in French print preserved the damage of copying itself. Terms related to the Sound, the Oresund, and Ellenbogen near modern Malmo, blurred as the story crossed languages and courts. The sea monk was not only a biological puzzle, its paperwork was damaged too. The evidence reached Europe in broken pieces almost from the first hour. With the sea monk, the mechanism may be brutally simple. The sea returned a body. People returned a story. For centuries, that story kept thickening. Later chroniclers attached the report to diplomacy, claiming Christian's gift of the drawings helped smooth his inclusion in the 1550 alliance. Treat that carefully. It is a reported connection, not a proven cause. But the claim itself shows what the image had become. Not a fish.
Not even a monster. A political object. A sea creature useful enough to move through imperial channels. By the time scholars tried to solve it, they were not solving one specimen. They were working through layers of handling. In 1855, the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup made a serious attempt. He looked at the old descriptions and proposed a giant squid. He linked the mystery to the name Architeuthis monicus, essentially a monk squid. It is dramatic because the idea is dramatic. A huge, soft-bodied animal, unfamiliar anatomy, arms mistaken for drapery, a head made monstrous by decay. For the 19th century, when giant squids still drifted in and out of rumor, it was a clever fit. But a clever fit is not the same thing as a correct one. In 2005, Paxton and Holland reopened the file and pushed the case in a less spectacular direction. Their stronger suspect was the angel shark, Squatina squatina. If you have never seen one from the wrong angle, that sounds absurd.
If you have, it begins to make unnerving sense. Angel sharks are flattened, broad-headed sharks. In death, in handling, or in a bad illustration, they can look bizarrely anthropomorphic. Their pectoral fins spread like draped cloth. Their body plan invites misreading. Once one witness supplies the word monk, every artist after him draws not what is there, but what the label allows. You can watch the transformation happen. A dead fish in the Oresund, a court sketch, a diplomatic gift, a printed woodcut, a learned encyclopedia entry. 3 centuries later, zoologists argue over squid versus shark from images none of them made and descriptions none of them heard firsthand. The sea monk survives not because its evidence is strong, but because each stage patched the weakness of the last with imagination. The missing body gives way to a drawing. The weak drawing gives way to authority. Authority gives way to tradition. Even the origin point refuses to stay fixed. Some sources pull toward 1546. Others drift toward 1549. Some imply the creature was caught. Others suggest it's stranded. Alive, dead, hauled up, found ashore, the circumstances keep slipping. Paxton and Holland favor one real 1546 Oresund event, and they may be right. But even in the best reconstruction, the monster reaches us already merged with other monkfish traditions, already polished by repetition, already carrying the fingerprints of everyone who needed it to be memorable. That makes Christian III's role larger than it first appears. He did not simply encounter a curiosity from his waters. He chose to elevate it, to dispatch it, to let the sea speak at court through an image instead of a carcass. That choice gave the creature a second life longer than the first by nearly 500 years. No one ever proved what it was. The picture outran the body. What remains is the line that launched the metamorphosis, dry and confident on the page, as if the matter were settled. A fish in the shape of a monk.
Number 10. Sea Bishop. In 1531, somewhere on the Baltic coast, fishermen hauled up a creature so perfectly made for rumor that it barely needed a witness. It had a face described as human-like, projections at the sides like arms or claws, tail fins like legs. On top, a head swelling into the outline of a bishop's mitre, not just a strange fish, a churchman from the sea. The story says it was not left on the shore or sold in a market. It was brought to Sigismund I, King of Poland, born in 1467, dead in 1548, and very real in a way the animal is not. That matters because this is where the tale hardens. A creature enters a royal audience, and a fisherman's exaggeration starts to look like evidence. The court gathered, the thing was displayed, then the strangest detail entered the record. The sea bishop, faced with king and clergy, made signs that it wanted to return to the water, so they carried it back. When they released it, the tale says, it hurled itself into the sea and vanished.
It is a clean, theatrical story, built to stick in the mind. Strip it down like a case file, and the first thing that disappears is the witness. We do not have a preserved body. We do not have a named naturalist who dissected it. We do not have measurements, weight, or even a stable place more precise than the Baltic world connected to Poland. What we have is a story that later entered Renaissance natural history through transmission. Letters, images, retellings. Broken pieces. Exactly the kind the deep keeps returning. Start with the first major printed source. Guillaume Rondelet. Born in 1507, one of the most serious fish scholars of the 16th century. In 1554, he published Libri de Piscibus Marinis, a huge work describing nearly 250 marine animals. It stayed influential for more than a century. If a monster entered Rondelet, it could stop looking like gossip and start looking scholarly. Turn to page 494, where the sea bishop appears, and the tone matters more than the image. Rondelet does not say he examined this thing. He does not present a specimen on the table. He says he saw letters in Rome. He saw an image. He reports the story. Then he refuses to guarantee it. He does not affirm it as fact. He does not dismiss it cleanly either. He leaves it hanging in that Renaissance zone between documentation and curiosity, where a rumor gains prestige just by being copied into a serious book. That is clue 1. The scholar most responsible for preserving the sea bishop was cautious at the exact point where later readers grew confident. Clue 2 is the timing. The alleged event is 1531. Rondelet prints it in 1554. That is a gap of 23 years. Long enough for a catch to become a performance. Long enough for a court anecdote to absorb symbolism. Long enough for details like, it gestured to be freed, to settle into place. Because monsters in stories rarely just die. They communicate. They recognize authority. They act like performers in a moral pageant. This one was almost too convenient. A bishop rising from the sea in the age of the Reformation was not just an odd fish. It was a symbol waiting to be used, a divine sign, a prodigy, or a joke with teeth. Anti-clerical visual satire disguised as zoology. That human face and mitre-shaped head do more than describe anatomy. They tell you how to read the image. Now the detective work gets colder. Could there have been a real animal behind it? Later writers proposed some. Giant squid, northern chimera. George Shaw, much later, suggested a distorted preparation of Chimera monstrosa. That sounds promising until you look at how these things usually happen. A damaged carcass loses its context first. Skin shrinks, fins warp. The mouth collapses into something almost expressive. Add one strong drawing, one suggestive comparison, one audience eager to see a bishop, and the anatomy starts obeying the metaphor instead of the body. The northern chimera is not absurd as a candidate. It has a bizarre profile, strange fins, a silhouette a practiced hand could exaggerate. But a chimera does not explain the court theater. It does not explain the signs asking for mercy. It does not explain why no one leaves us a practical description that a modern zoologist could confidently test. Those details belong to narrative, not specimen handling. Consider a giant squid, and the fit gets worse. Squid can become almost anything in secondhand description because they fall apart fast and look uncanny even when fresh. But this creature is described less like an animal observed up close than like a caricature assembled from symbols. Face, arms, legs, mitre. A body translated into a joke the moment it is seen. Then comes clue 3. In 1558, just 4 years after Rondelet, Conrad Gessner absorbed the sea bishop into the aquatic volume of Historia Animalium. Here the case changes shape again. One cautious report becomes part of a reference tradition. One printed hesitation becomes a standard European sea monster image. After that, later readers do not meet a doubtful anecdote. They meet a creature with citations. You can watch the laundering happen in slow motion. Fishermen pull up something strange. A court retells it. Letters travel. An image travels with them. Rondelet prints it without vouching for it. Gessner prints it with the weight of compilation. The uncertainty never disappears, but each layer makes it harder to see. The central problem sits right on the table. Who actually examined this thing? Not the fisherman, at least not in any record we can test. Not Rondelet, not a surviving anatomist. Not even a named eyewitness whose direct inspection we can reconstruct. The story depends on transmitted letters and pictures. That is all. The body, if there was a body, is gone. The shore is gone. The hands that lifted it are gone.
What remains is a sequence of documents that repeats the performance more clearly than it describes the animal. One detail is polished enough to stand out. The king sees the bishop fish. The bishop fish makes signs. The bishop fish is granted release. Then it dives back into the deep before anyone can cut it open, preserve it, or test the miracle against flesh. Evidence does not usually behave like that. Stories do. So the sea bishop may have been a real marine animal bent into meaning. It may have been a manipulated specimen. It may have been only an image attached to a useful story. Whichever one you choose, the mechanism stays the same. The less body there is, the more symbolism can do. And in this case, symbolism had a royal audience. Picture it for a second. A chamber in Poland, faces leaning in. The catch from the Baltic, laid out under court light. A king, looking down at something with a man's face and a bishop's crown. Someone swears it is making signs with its fins. Someone decides that means it wants the sea. They carry it outside. They reach the shore. Hands loosen. The surf comes up around the body. Then it is gone, and the court is left with nothing but the picture.
Number 9. Mermaid. On January 9, 1493, Christopher Columbus entered a brief note into the record of his first Atlantic voyage near what is now the Dominican Republic. He wrote that the day before he had seen 3 mermaids rise from the sea. Not 1, 3. That matters. 3 is harder to dismiss as a flash of foam or a single animal rolling at a distance. The rest of the note matters even more. Columbus did not describe flowing hair or pale skin or anything like the painted women Europe already knew by heart. He wrote that they were not as beautiful as they were said to be, and that their faces looked somewhat masculine. Start with the body that fits those numbers. An adult West Indian manatee typically measures 9 to 10 feet and weighs about 1,000 pounds. Some exceed 13 feet. Some reach 3,500 pounds. At the surface, that mass does not appear all at once. You get a rounded head, nostrils breaking the water. Dark eyes set forward enough for a face to register as a face. Whiskers around the mouth. Forelimbs tucked near the body, but able to flex in ways that can look uncannily arm-like from a distance. Then the animal sinks. The tail slips under the chop before the brain finishes the comparison. If you already carry mermaids in your head, the image does the rest. Add the conditions. Columbus was not on a sightseeing cruise. This was the return leg of the 1492 to 1493 voyage, after a crossing that had already taken him across the Atlantic and back into waters unfamiliar to Europeans. New coastlines, new currents, new animals. Long days at sea compress judgment, distances flatten, scale turns unstable. A creature surfacing 40 or 50 yards off the beam does not reach the eye as a textbook specimen. It arrives in fragments. Head, motion, symmetry. Maybe a brief upright angle in the water if the body rolls just right. Across the ocean record, the same pattern repeats. The sea gives back pieces. People build the creature from there. The speed fits too. Manatees are usually slow, but in short bursts they can reach about 15 miles per hour. A sighting can form and vanish before a witness has time to correct it. 3 shapes surface in sequence. One lifts, another rolls, a third hangs at the top of the water for a second longer than it should. The mind starts solving the image before the image is complete. That does not make Columbus foolish. It makes him human. He was doing what people do when a half-seen animal collides with a story already waiting in the head. The taxonomic joke came later. The real animals most often used to explain mermaid reports belong to the order Sirenia. The scientific name preserves the myth. Science did not confirm mermaids. The legend had already attached itself to the body so tightly, the classification carried it forward. Sirens in poetry, Sirenia in zoology. The fantasy loses the argument but keeps a room in the building. There is one complication. The neat viral version pins everything to January 9, 1493, with the sighting on the previous day. Some retellings, working from later journal traditions, shift the encounter to January 4th. That sounds minor, but in forensic terms it matters. The closer a story sits to an original record, the stronger it is. The more it passes through copies, abstracts, and summaries, the more friction enters the timeline. Even one of the most famous mermaid sightings in history does not reach us as clean glass. It reaches us the way deep-water evidence often does, delayed, filtered, slightly warped in transmission. Still, the anatomy does most of the work. A manatee is air-breathing, so it must surface. It has a large torso that can loom human-sized because it is human-sized, or larger. It has a mobile upper lip and facial whiskers that create expression where there is only feeding equipment. It can lift part of the body vertically as it maneuvers. Its tail is a broad paddle, not a forked fishtail, so the lower half often disappears as a single dark mass under surface glare. The witness never gets a complete creature. He gets a top half that reads one way and a bottom half the water refuses to explain. That should have killed the mermaid story. It did not. In 1842, P.T. Barnum began promoting the Fiji mermaid in New York. This time, the creature did not arrive from a navigator's exhausted glance over open water. It arrived in a case, under controlled light, as something the public could pay to inspect. The body was not a new species. It was a fabrication, a monkey torso stitched to a fishtail, dried into a small, grotesque hybrid. That is exactly why it matters. By 1842, the age of shipboard wonder had not ended. It had industrialized. The mermaid no longer needed a horizon. It needed a ticket booth. Look at the numbers again. 3 animals in 1493. A 9 to 10-foot marine mammal weighing around 1,000 pounds.
Bursts of 15 miles per hour. Extinction by the 1760s for Steller's sea cow, another giant sirenian that sometimes gets folded into mermaid talk long after it was gone. Then, 1842, when the public is shown a mermaid finally stable enough to study because it is fake enough to display. The pattern is almost mechanical. A real animal, a partial glimpse, a myth laid over the top. Then, when naming the animal fails to erase the story, a showman manufactures the body the ocean would not provide. Noé's position is blunt. There is no evidence that aquatic humanoids have ever been found. No skeleton, no tissue, no verified species. Officially, the mermaid is settled. A manatee here, a dugong there, a hoax in a museum case. Case closed. But the myth does not behave that way. Officially, the mermaid is a classification error. On the water, and in the imagination, it is a visibility problem.
A human figure assembled from seconds of bad angle, old stories, and an animal surfacing just long enough to look back. The evidence never arrives as a body with a label. It arrives as 3 shapes in the swell. A disappointed line in a captain's log. Then, centuries later, a fake corpse people were somehow more ready to believe than the real animal swimming underneath it.
Number 8. Siren. Years after the escape, the image changes. Around 480 to 470 BC, an Athenian painter put the scene on a red figure vase now in the British Museum. A ship, a mast, bird-bodied women with human heads, and one siren already dropping from a cliff as if failure itself has killed her. It is aftermath in visual form. No rescued crew celebrating, no monster ripped apart. A singer falling out of the world because, for once, her voice did not work. If that version is true, the siren was not just a creature on a rock. It was a maritime weapon with one condition for survival. Somebody had to listen. The clearest test case comes earlier, in Homer, Book 12 of the Odyssey. Odysseus has just left Circe and she does not describe the sirens like a traveler pointing out some curious local danger. She gives him procedure. There are 2 of them in this passage. They sit in a meadow. Any sailor who hears them is finished. He forgets home. He never reaches his wife and children.
Around the singers lie bones and shriveling skin. The coastline already shows what happened to the last men who came too close. This is one of the oldest monster encounters in Western literature, but it does not move like a beast attack. No jaws in the surf, no tentacles on the hull. The kill mechanism is attention. A ship enters range. A voice gets inside the mind. The victim helps carry out his own death. So Odysseus prepares for it like a captain facing a known navigational hazard. He kneads wax and seals the ears of his crew. He alone wants to hear the song, because the bait is not just pleasure. In Homer, the sirens promise knowledge. They know what happened at Troy. They know what happens across the earth. They offer the one thing a famous, exhausted survivor is least able to resist. Not safety, understanding. The myth turns cold here, almost clinical. Odysseus orders his men to lash him upright to the mast, not loosely, not symbolically. Tight enough that if he begs, they are to tighten the ropes again. The logic is plain. Remove hearing from the rowers, remove movement from the only listener, keep the ship on course. It is not exorcism, it is damage control. Treat the scene as a practical scenario instead of a poem, and the implications turn ugly fast. Imagine a narrow passage, crosswind, rocks close enough that the oar rhythm matters. One officer hears a voice no one else can hear. He starts issuing suicidal orders. Turn to port. Slow the stroke. Bring us closer. If the crew obeys, the ship dies. If the crew hears it too, discipline collapses at once. Men stop rowing. Men stand up. Men look toward shore. One leap overboard is enough to start the rest. Homer builds straight toward that outcome. The men row on because they cannot hear. Odysseus hears and immediately wants to go to them. He signals. He struggles. He tries to get free. The system holds. The ropes bite. The wax works. The ship passes. The sirens fail not because they are weaker, but because for one brief stretch of sea, every point of access is blocked. Centuries later, another poet runs the scene again. In Book 4 of Apollonius Rhodius's Argonautica, the Argonauts pass the sirens too. But the method changes, and the change shows what later Greeks thought the danger really was. This time, Orpheus does not seal every ear. He plays louder. His lyre floods the air and overpowers the song. The countermeasure is not silence. It is competing signal. It almost works. One man still breaks. Butes hears enough to leap overboard and swim for them before a goddess rescues him. There is the consequence, years after Homer's first manual. Even with the best musician on the ship, even with heroes at the oars, one listener is enough. You do not need the whole crew mesmerized. You need one body in the water, one man off rhythm, one chain of command interrupted at the wrong second near the wrong coast. If the siren myth began in real maritime fear, it describes a threat sailors would have recognized instantly. Offshore sound behaves strangely. Distance lies. Wind carries voices where no body is visible. A lookout strains to identify what he heard, and the mind fills the gap before the eye can confirm it. The pattern keeps returning across this whole ocean. Not a whole creature in daylight, but evidence in broken pieces. A voice without a body, a command without a source, a man already moving before anyone else understands why. The details around the creature only sharpen the point. Later tradition often makes the sirens three and gives them names: Paisanoe, Aglaope, Thelxiopeia, Parthenope, Ligeia, Leucosia, depending on the source. Their parentage shifts too, often the river god Achelous and the muse Melpomene, though even that refuses to stay fixed. But the oldest surviving trap scene is simpler and colder. Two singers, one shore, bones in the grass. The image does not need taxonomy. The method is already complete. And the image is not mermaid-shaped. In early Greek art, the siren is bird-bodied, a woman's head set on a feathered killer. Sometimes early images vary further before the type settles. The famous vase is honest about this. Wings, claws, song. The monster belongs to air and coast more than open water. Sailors still meet it from the sea. That is why it enters the catalog of underwater things at all. Not because it lives in the depths, but because that is where you hear it from. Then comes the contradiction no version fully resolves. Homer lets the ship escape and leaves the sirens alive. Later storytelling and art lean toward another ending. Once a sailor survives their call, the singers die, or throw themselves down, or somehow cannot continue after failure. The myth preserves both states at once. In one, the hazard remains on the chart for the next ship. In the other, the trap destroys itself the first time someone learns how it works. At sea, that changes everything. One version leaves the predator out there. The other leaves only the story of a predator that was beaten once and vanished. What returns to us is not the body. It is the operating manual, copied across centuries, with one detail missing. Off an unseen coast, the rowers keep their heads down. The wax holds. A bound man twists against the mast while a voice from the rocks tells him it knows everything he has ever wanted to know. The ship slides on into darkness. Behind it, either two singers are still waiting in the grass, or something with wings has already begun to fall. Number 7. Cetus. The monster so large the sky had to keep it. On a patch of heaven covering 1,231 square degrees, the fourth largest constellation still carries a single Greek word, Cetus. Not a species, not even one fixed shape, just a sea thing big enough to swallow a princess and leave a mark on the stars. In the 2nd century, in the text we call the Bibliotheca, Apollodorus tells it with the chill of a report. Perseus is flying home after killing Medusa. He reaches Ethiopia. He sees a young woman fastened on the shore, left out as food for a sea monster. Her name is Andromeda. Her father is Cepheus. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had boasted that her daughter surpassed the Nereids in beauty. The sea powers took offense and appealed upward. Poseidon answered with two things at once, floodwater and Cetus. That pairing matters. The beast is not just an animal. It is the ocean turned punitive, teeth attached to a sentence. The horror becomes procedural. The cure comes from the oracle of Ammon. There is a condition. To stop the devastation, Andromeda must be offered to the monster. Cepheus gives in under pressure from his people and chains his daughter beside the sea. No hunt, no voyage, no crew spotting some shape beyond the reef. A king gets instructions. A city obeys. A girl is pinned in place for something from the water to collect. Ovid, writing later in the Metamorphoses, keeps one small detail that makes the scene feel immediate. Perseus sees Andromeda on the rock and almost takes her for a statue. Only her moving hair and the tears on her face show that she is alive. The image locks into place. Rock, chains, surf, a figure so still she looks carved. Then the sea starts to move. If you want the artifact version, there is one. In the British Museum sits a red figure hydria made between 400 and 300 BC, 36.25 centimeters tall. It shows Perseus at the court of Cepheus, with Andromeda bound between columns, not the kill itself. The setup, the official arrangement around it. That keeps happening with Cetus. The record does not give you the body, it gives you the staging, a vase, a poem, a prose summary, a star map, broken pieces. Those pieces do not fully agree. In Apollodorus, Perseus sees Andromeda, falls in love, negotiates for her hand, and kills the sea monster before freeing her, a clean sequence. But the first thing any witness account should settle is the method. Here the tradition starts to slide. Some versions lean toward direct combat, with Perseus attacking from above using a blade, sometimes imagined as curved or sickle-like. Other tellings bring in Medusa's head, the Gorgon trophy still hanging from his gear. Then Cetus is not slain but petrified. The difference is enormous. In one version, the hero beats the sea in a fight. In the other, the sea creature becomes collateral damage from an older horror. That uncertainty matters. Cetus is less a zoological monster than a mythic delivery system. Ancient Greek Cetus could mean a monstrous fish, a whale-like beast, a sea dragon, a serpentine predator. It is a category for whatever huge thing should not be in the water but is. So when later readers ask what Cetus looked like, the honest answer is simple. Whatever the coastline feared most. A jaw, a coil, a black back rising out of surf. The shape shifts because the function does not. Poseidon needed a punishment, and the sea supplied one. Pseudo-Hyginus says it plainly in the Astronomica. Cetus was sent by Neptune to kill Andromeda, and after Perseus defeated it, the creature was placed among the constellations because of its size and the hero's valor. The heavens do not preserve an ecosystem, they preserve a verdict. Cassiopeia nearby, Cepheus nearby, Andromeda still chained, Perseus armed, Cetus below them. Every autumn, the sky restages the same coastal emergency, as if the scene was too important to dismantle. Cetus shifts the tempo of the whole monster catalog. Leviathan, Kraken, sea serpents, they feel like beasts that might still be out there if the map ran far enough. Cetus enters differently. Punishment first, creature second. The deep is not hiding an undiscovered animal here. It is hiding agency, rage, rank, a god using water as enforcement. Later generations keep trying to read that as biology because the force arrives in the shape of a monster. There is even a geographical fracture in the testimony. The kingdom is usually placed in Ethiopia, but another tradition moves the scene to Joppa, modern Jaffa. Pliny reports a rock there associated with Andromeda's chains. The myth leaves the page and touches coastline. Not proof. Something stickier than proof. A place people pointed to. This happened here, right here, on this stone. That is how sea monster stories harden. Not through complete remains, but through places, names, and objects that outlive the explanation attached to them.
Look up on a clear autumn night, and the tableau still works. You can trace Perseus. You can find Andromeda. Drop lower, and you find Cetus, abbreviation CET, standardized by the IAU in 1922, with stars carrying the genitive form SETI, as if the old monster had to be catalogued for modern astronomy without ever being tamed by it. Scientific labels, ancient panic, same sky. What does the document actually tell you? Not that Greek sailors measured some unknown whale and exaggerated it into legend. The record is stranger. A queen boasts, sea nymphs complain. A god sends flood and predator together. A city chains up one of its own. A hero arrives carrying the head of one monster and leaves another one dead, or turned to stone. Then the whole arrangement is fixed overhead, where everyone can inspect it and no one can verify the kill. Cetus survives because it was never just the beast in front of the rock. It was the sea when the sea starts acting like a sentence. And the one detail that should be simplest, the method of death, is the one the record will not hold still. Perseus saved Andromeda. Cetus died. The body was never the important part.
Number 6. Giant sea serpent. August 6, 1848. About 5 in the evening. You're on the deck of HMS Daedalus in the South Atlantic, roughly 300 miles off what is now Namibia, with St. Helena still ahead and the Cape of Good Hope behind. The sea is open. Clean horizon. Nothing to hide behind. Then Midshipman Sartoris points off the beam. Everyone turns. Captain Peter McQuahay looks. The first lieutenant looks. The sailing master looks. What they see is not a splash, not a fin, not one quick breach. It keeps moving. Long, dark, level with the surface. A head lifted several feet above the water. What McQuahay would later call shoulders. Then more body behind it, with still more submerged. This case holds because there was not one witness, but several. Not one frightened fisherman in fog, but a naval corvette. Trained officers. Daylight. Distance close enough to describe movement, but far enough to distort shape in exactly the worst way. McQuahay estimated at least 60 feet visible. Then he added another 30 or 40 feet underwater. He put its speed at around 15 miles per hour, fast enough to hold attention, slow enough to study. The Daedalus did not chase it. The animal was traveling too close to the wind for the ship to pursue effectively. That almost made the moment stronger. No scramble, no cannon smoke, no dramatic hunt. Just men at the rail, watching something impossible pass by as if it belonged there. That is how these sightings get under your skin. If the deep hides anything, it does not need to erupt like a stage monster. It only has to slide past in profile, calmly, briefly. Give you enough body to let your mind build the rest. First Lieutenant Edgar Atheling Drummond made a rough sketch. That matters. A sketch made near the event is usually better than a polished memory made later. And Drummond's version is not the perfect Victorian nightmare people remember. It seems to show something with a pointed head, a dorsal fin, a body at the surface.
Strange, yes, but maybe not a snake from prehistory. Then the story reached Britain. On October 10, 1848, it breaks in the Times. On October 28th, the Illustrated London News turns it into a visual spectacle. Engravings, headlines, a Royal Navy serpent, witnessed by sober men in uniform. Now the creature is no longer only in the water, it is in the paper, in parlors, in arguments, in the national imagination. Print changes animals. A thing seen for a few minutes becomes a thing described for years. Features sharpen, lengths stretch. A lifted head becomes a serpent's neck. Surface motion becomes coils. The sea returns evidence in broken pieces. The press does not like broken pieces. It wants one image, one outline, one monster. Naturalists push back. The biggest name among them is Richard Owen, the same anatomist who helped define how Victorians thought about extinct beasts. Owen argues the Daedalus animal was probably an elephant seal. It sounds neat, sensible, case closed.
Mackay did not accept it. He rejected it, hard. Said the creature he saw was nothing like an elephant seal. Wrong head, wrong motion, wrong scale. And if you place yourself on that deck, the seal answer does feel thin. An elephant seal can look bizarre at sea, yes, but 60 feet visible, shoulders raised, body extended along the surface at speed, it does not fit cleanly. You can feel the witness bristling at being told he mistook one very large thing for another very different one. That still does not rescue the serpent. The strongest modern explanations do something more interesting. They do not say the officers saw nothing. They say the officers saw something real, under conditions almost built to produce a monster. A whale-like rorqual, surface feeding in an unusual posture, can create a segmented illusion. Head here, back there, fin behind. The water stitches separate parts into one long, continuous animal. If the body rises and falls in sequence, your brain connects it instantly, especially on a flat horizon with no good reference for scale. That makes the case better, not worse. The point is not that sailors were gullible. The point is that perception is mechanical. You are a pattern-making machine standing on a moving deck, looking at another moving body on a moving sea. The monster is not invented from nothing. It is assembled from real parts. The giant sea serpent legend did not come from one species. It came from several, stacked on top of each other. Whales at the surface, giant squid glimpsed dying, undulating masses of porpoises in line, and hanging far below all of that, the deep's favorite contribution to bad ideas, Regalicus glesni, the giant oarfish. That fish really does feel like cheating. A ribbon-bodied animal over 25 feet long by common modern estimates, with some reports and visual estimates pushing far beyond that. Silver body, red dorsal crest. A living strip of metal tape from the dark. Wash one of those onto a beach and you do not need folklore to make it uncanny. You only need eyes. Even here the fit is not perfect. We love the oarfish because it looks like what we already mean by sea serpent. Long body, strange face, impossible proportions. But living oarfish do not necessarily behave like the classic story. NOAA's Russ Vetter has noted that they can hang vertically in the water column, moving with that long, ribbon-like dorsal fin. That is somehow stranger than a sea serpent and less useful to the myth. The real animal is too odd in the wrong direction. So the most famous serpent case may not match the most famous serpent candidate. That is the pattern, over and over. The beast in the story and the animal in the water keep missing each other by a few crucial details. The Daedalus sighting leaves one ugly contradiction sitting in the middle of the deck. Drummond's rough sketch appears relatively restrained. Later public versions lean harder into the snake-like head, the mane, the teeth, the dramatic length. So what changed? Not the body in the water, the body in memory. You can almost watch the transformation happen. First, an unfamiliar form, then an official report, then a newspaper engraving, then a monster with better posture and sharper teeth than reality usually provides. This sighting lasted when thousands of other strange things at sea vanished, because it had rank, witnesses, and pictures. It also arrived in exactly the form a sea serpent story needs, clear enough to circulate, incomplete enough to grow. Not fraud, not proof. A collision between real animals and bad viewing conditions, locked in print before the uncertainty could die. Then Mackay gave it the words that would outlive the sighting. An enormous serpent. Number 5. Lusca. In the late 1990s, Randy Wayne White arrived in Arthurstown on Cat Island, carrying what he thought was protection. A British cave diving report, folded, worn from travel, official-looking enough to make a bad idea feel manageable. Mark Kiesler was with him, Andy Fox too. They had come for a place locals called the Bad Blue Hole. At the cookie house, before they ever reached the water, Pat Roll told them not to go near it. It was not casual advice, it was a warning. The room is small, plates on the table, voices in the heat. White has the report in his hand, and paper can calm people down. A survey, depths, notes, British divers. The kind of document that makes you think somebody serious has already gone there and come back. Pat Roll looks past the paper. The hole is bad, he says. Bad enough that the name stayed. Bad enough that locals do not need a chart. Then an 81-year-old man named Gator Ishmael begins to talk. He is not performing.
He is explaining why people leave that place alone. When he was young, he says, his family had a dead horse to get rid of. They pushed it into the lake. You can see the scene as he tells it. The weight of the animal sliding off the bank, the black surface taking it, the body floating away from shore, still, drifting. Then a ridge forms on the water. Not a splash, not a fin, a long ridge, moving. It crosses the lake toward the horse. Something rises. Ishmael watches it seize the carcass and drag it under. He does not dress it up. He does not name it. He gives them the memory, and the memory is enough. Blue holes are not simple ponds. They are old openings into cave systems. They connect to the sea. They have depth, passages, and darkness under flat water. If something large wanted a place where nobody could see it, this would do. White and the others go anyway. They have the report.
3 men with masks and fins can talk themselves into almost anything when there is an official document on the table. A warning over lunch is one thing. A destination already chosen is another. They drive out expecting a clean blue opening, the kind divers describe in tidy language. Clear water, hard edges, something measurable. Instead, they find a 40-acre mangrove lake. Not blue, black. The surface looks heavy, stained by vegetation, thick with tannin. Mangroves lean over it. The shoreline is not the rim of an obvious vertical pit. It is swampy and deceptive. Distance blurs. The water gives away almost nothing. Whatever image the phrase blue hole had built in their heads collapses the moment they see it. White opens the report again. Now the mistake shows itself. They misread it. The British cave diving material does not prove this exact place is safe. It does not neatly match the water in front of them. The confidence they carried out from Arthurstown starts leaking away line by line. The paper is still official. The paper is still real. But the lake is real in a more immediate way. They stand at the edge with masks in hand, looking into water that reflects almost nothing back. The locals said not to come. An old man described a horse being taken under. The one thing meant to settle the argument settles very little. They go in carefully, not deep at first. A snorkel along the edge, faces down, kicking through warm surface water under mangrove shade. The visibility is poor compared to the bright postcard Bahamas people imagine from a plane window. This is not that Bahamas. This is root shadow, suspended matter, and sudden dark patches that might be depth or weed or just the light failing under clouds. Every few strokes you expect some shape to form below you. The lake keeps its floor to itself. At one point they check a spot measuring about 25 feet. That is enough to unsettle anyone in water this dark. 25 feet is not abyssal. It is not the impossible depth a story wants. But in black water, with a mask pressed to your face and mangrove branches scratching the bank behind you, 25 feet is enough for imagination to start building anatomy. A pale limb becomes a root, a shadow becomes a drop. The open water farther out becomes a sentence nobody finishes. They keep looking. Nothing rises. No horse-eater, no giant octopus, no hybrid thing with too many arms and too much pull. No underwater mouth opening from a cave. Only the lake, the dark, the heat, and the irritating fact that fear does not need an animal in front of you to stay alive. The water itself is not harmless. Across the Bahamas, there are more than 1,000 blue holes, and less than 20% have been probed. On Andros alone, there are about 175 inland blue holes and more than 50 submerged ocean caves. Water moves through some of them with the tide, pushed in and pulled out through limestone passages with enough force that locals did not need hydrology to imagine a creature that breathes. Out on Cat Island, standing in mangrove water with a snorkel in your mouth, you do not need the full science. You only need to feel that a hole can connect to somewhere else, that flat water can hide structure, that a lake can act like a mouth. White and the others circle, scan, dive in short drops, and come back up. Their breathing grows louder in their own heads. Sun flashes on the ripples. In the shallows, the bottom appears and disappears. Farther out, it goes dark again. The report cannot help them now. The only useful fact is under the surface, and the surface will not give it up. They climb out with no monster to point at. That should reduce the whole thing to a story told in a cafe by an old man remembering a horse. It should turn Bad Blue Hole into a place with bad visibility, local dread, and nothing more. It does not. The warning came first. The paper came second. The water contradicted both. The hard result is simple. 3 men went to look for the thing, searched the lake, and left without disproving the reason people fear it. Back in Arthurstown, the report is still folded. Pat Roll's warning still hangs in the air. Out on that black 40-acre surface, a line begins to move.
Number 4. Scylla. In the late 8th century BCE, a poet the world calls Homer puts one man in a place no captain would choose on purpose. Odysseus has left Circe's island. He is trying to get home. Ahead, the route tightens into a passage with death built into both sides. On one side is Charybdis, the sea swallowing itself. On the other is Scylla, hidden high in a cliff cave. Odysseus does not drift into this blind. He is warned in advance. Circe tells him exactly what kind of choice this is. Do not fight. Do not stand there trying to be a hero. Hug Scylla's side of the passage, lose 6 men, and keep the ship. Drift toward Charybdis, and the whole crew dies. This is not a monster hunt. It is maritime triage. Scylla enters the story not as a distant mystery, but as a fixed cost a commander is told to pay. The scene is in Book 12 of the Odyssey, and Homer stages it with cruel precision. Odysseus knows something is waiting on the rocks. He still arms himself. Of course he does. He takes 2 spears. He climbs the deck. He stares at the cliff, trying to catch the first movement, the first neck, the first sign that skill can meet this thing. But Circe has already told him the truth. He will not see her coming in time. Scylla fits one of the oldest fears sailors have. Not the beast you can chase, the one you only understand after it has already taken someone. Now stand on the ship. You are not looking up. You are looking the other way. Charybdis is boiling, drawing down, spitting spray, doing exactly what terrifies crews in a strait where current and rock make the sea behave like an engine. Later writers place this passage in the Strait of Messina, the 32-kilometer channel between Sicily and Calabria, only 3 to 16 kilometers wide depending on where you cross. Even now it can look deceptive from above. Calm in one patch, torn apart in the next. So the crew watch the danger they can see. Scylla needs that one opening. Homer's version is stranger than the image most people carry now. Not the fish-tailed woman from later art. Not yet the glamorous victim of a jealous sorceress. In the Odyssey, she is mostly anatomy and position. 12 feet dangling below, 6 long necks, a head on each one. 3 rows of teeth in every mouth, a voice like a dog. She is less a person than an ambush built into the cliff. Odysseus still tries to outwatch the trap. Trying is not seeing, and the sea teaches that lesson the hard way. When the ship enters the Narrows, all attention goes to Charybdis. The whirlpool is the spectacle. Men point at it. Fear has prepared them for it. Then Scylla strikes from above, from behind, from exactly where no one is looking. 6 heads shoot down from the rock and take 6 sailors from the deck. Not random sailors. Homer makes it worse than that. The strongest men. The best hands on the ship. 1 head for each man. Efficient. Clean. Final. Odysseus sees them lifted into the air. He sees their hands and feet reaching down toward him. He hears them cry his name. That image keeps Scylla alive when so many monsters flatten into symbols. This is a captain watching the price of the correct decision. He did what he was told. He chose the route that saved the ship. He also chose in advance the deaths of 6 men. That makes this a darker kind of monster story. The horror is not only in the jaws, it is in the arithmetic. Scylla has 6 heads. 6 men die. Charybdis swallows and spits the sea 3 times a day, so you avoid the larger disaster and accept the smaller one. The numbers are almost obscene in how practical they are. Homer is not describing chaos. He is describing a loss model. That helps explain why the myth keeps returning in broken pieces across centuries. Sailors do not always preserve a clear creature. Sometimes they preserve a rule, a warning. Stay off that side of the channel. Do not fixate on the obvious danger. The rock kills too. The thing you can chart may still feel like a mouth. Later Roman writers would not leave Scylla this raw. They gave her a past. In Ovid and Hyginus, she had once been a young woman or a nymph,
transformed by Circe out of jealousy over Glaucus. It is a memorable backstory. It gives the monster a before and after, a face, a grievance. It also softens something essential in Homer's version. In the older telling, Scylla does not need an origin that makes emotional sense. She is already complete as a coastal nightmare. That older form feels closer to the way real maritime fears are born. Not from neat biographies, from repeated passage through the same dangerous place, from currents that lunge, from cliffs that hide what the eye cannot track, from captains who learn that survival at sea sometimes means choosing which part of the crew does not come back. Odysseus's story is often remembered as a clash with a famous monster, but that is almost the wrong genre. He does not slay Scylla. He does not outsmart her. He does not truly confront her. He passes. He loses men. He keeps moving because stopping would kill everyone else. That feels closer to navigation than combat, closer to a pilot's note than a heroic legend. So what was Scylla? She may have been a divine creature in a poem. She may have absorbed the behavior of a real strait, notorious in the Greek world by the late 8th century BCE. She may have been both at once. Through Odysseus, she becomes something more durable, a monster that behaves like a hazard charted by grief. Officially, Scylla is one of antiquity's great beasts, a six-headed horror crouched above a legendary channel. On the deck below, 6 sailors vanish while their captain makes the right call. That is the part that remains, a passage where the sea demands a receipt.
Number 3. Charybdis. In Book 12 of the Odyssey, Odysseus is not told to fight Charybdis, he is told to time her. Circe lays out the passage like a navigator marking a kill zone. One cliff, Scylla, the lower rock opposite, a great fig tree, beneath it, Charybdis. 3 times a day she swallows the sea, 3 times a day she throws it back. Hit that cycle wrong, Circe says, and not even Poseidon will get your ship out. The choice is brutally simple. Lose 6 men to the cliff monster, or risk the whole crew to the thing in the water. Charybdis enters myth not as a body but as a mechanism. Homer is careful about that. Scylla gets anatomy, heads, necks, teeth. Charybdis gets behavior. The sea falls, the seabed appears, rocks roar, wreckage vanishes and returns. If you are looking for fins, claws, or eyes in the earliest version, they are not there. What you get instead is a set of repeatable actions, almost like a mariner's warning turned into verse.
Stand in the wrong place at the wrong hour, and the water itself becomes a mouth. She represents a different kind of fear. A creature can be watched, it can be tracked. Even if you cannot beat it, you can point to it. Charybdis is partly invisible. You see the effects first. Current bending where it should run straight, water lowering where it should stay level, a ship beginning to answer the sea instead of the helmsman. In practical terms, this is not a duel. It is loss of control. Start with the sensation, an ancient Greek sea monster that drank the ocean 3 times a day and spat it back out. Later writers try hard to give that nightmare a biography. In Scholia traditions, she becomes a daughter of Poseidon and Gaia. In another version, of Pontos and Gaia. In Servius, she steals the oxen of Heracles. Zeus hurls her into the sea with a thunderbolt, and her greed turns into a whirlpool. That is clean mythic logic. Crime, punishment, transformation. But it is later.
It arrives after Homer. It solves a problem Homer never seems interested in solving. What is Charybdis supposed to look like? The older poem sidesteps that. The point is not her appearance. The point is what happens to a ship when water in a confined passage starts behaving violently enough to erase seamanship. Circe's advice is cold for that reason. She does not tell Odysseus to hope for a perfect run. She tells him to choose the risk that stays bounded. Scylla is guaranteed limited loss. Charybdis is possible total loss. In modern terms, one side is catastrophic but capped. The other is lower probability, zero control annihilation. For a captain, that is risk management with blood in it. You can see the structure in the scene itself. Odysseus steers toward Scylla because Circe told him to. His crew are staring at Charybdis. They watch the water suck down. They see the bottom. They hear the rocks. Their attention locks onto the obvious terror below. While everyone is fixed on that opening in the sea, Scylla takes 6 men from above. The poem turns the channel into a trap with 2 different mechanics. One hazard seizes your eye. The other uses the distraction. So even in the myth, Charybdis works less like a beast than a force multiplier. Later readers tied that force to a real place, the Strait of Messina, the channel between Sicily and mainland Italy.
Homer does not clearly name it. That identification becomes standard later, by the classical period. Once the link sticks, the myth starts to look less like fantasy piled onto open ocean and more like memory attached to a difficult passage. The strait itself is about 32 kilometers, or 20 miles long, and up to 16 kilometers, or 10 miles wide at its broadest point. Those numbers sound too large for a fairy tale bottleneck. But width is not safety when currents compress over uneven seafloor, and opposing water masses meet in a narrow route ships have to cross cleanly. Modern oceanography is less poetic and more useful. In the Scylla region of Messina, spring tide currents can reach around 3 meters per second. That matters immediately to maneuvering, especially in pre-modern hulls under oar and sail, in traffic, near rock, with imperfect local knowledge and no second chance if you drift broadside into bad water. The Strait of Messina is not literally draining the Mediterranean 3 times a day. Myths do not need exact hydraulics. They need repeated experience of the same danger, compressed into a pattern the next crew will remember. Charybdis fits that pattern exactly. 3 times down, 3 times up. A cycle simple enough to teach, severe enough to obey. The poetry exaggerates the scale, but the logic is practical. Mariners do not preserve every detail of a hazard. They preserve the part that keeps you alive. Where it is, when it turns, what happens if you misjudge it. Homer's version sounds supernatural, but structurally it behaves like a warning passed from pilot to pilot until the warning itself grows teeth. That also explains why Charybdis keeps resisting a clean monster reveal. If she began as a whirlpool personified, then later genealogy is decoration added to a functioning hazard marker. If she began as a divine being, Homer still strips her down to the one thing a crew would actually care about: operation. How does it work? When does it strike? Can the ship survive the pull? On that level, the myth is almost forensic. There is a fixed location under the fig tree. There is a recurring cycle. There is a known consequence. There is one recommended route, and it is awful. Then Odysseus comes back alone. Zeus has shattered his ship near Thrinacia. He is driven once more toward Charybdis, with no crew left to command, and no vessel left worth the name. He clings to the fig tree over the void, and waits for the wreckage to come back up. Not to defeat her, not to understand her, just to survive the timing. Splintered wood rises quietly out of black water. That is all the monster needs. Number 2. Kraken. In 1755, a book printed in London turned a fisherman's panic into something almost measurable. Eric Pontoppidan, Bishop of Bergen, published the English edition of The Natural History of Norway. Inside it, the Kraken stops being only a tavern story and starts behaving like a set of numbers. You row out over northern water expecting 80 to 100 fathoms, then the line tells you 20, maybe 30. Same sea, same boat, but the bottom has risen toward you by 300 to 420 feet. Then the pattern continues. The catch improves. Cod and ling come up so fast that the men stop arguing about luck and start naming the cause. They think they are fishing over the creature's back, not near it, over it. So the monster becomes more than a threat. It becomes a feeding ground, a dangerous one. Pontoppidan records crews taking the abundance first, while watching the water line and the sounding line at the same time. If that false bottom rose any higher, they were supposed to leave immediately. Not later. Not after one more cast. At once. In the account he gathered, the sequence was fixed. First the shoals gather, then the depth changes. Then the surface swells into scattered humps, almost like small islands. Then arms rise, mast high in later retellings, and the whole thing sinks again. When it sinks, it pulls the sea with it. The reward comes first. The hazard comes second. That tells you what kind of memory this is. Not a random sea tale, a working pattern. If the deep keeps returning evidence only in broken pieces, this is one of the oldest fragments. A creature detected not by seeing it, but by what it does to fish, depth, and current. Start with the depth again. A fathom is 6 feet, so 80 to 100 fathoms means 480 to 600 feet. 20 to 30 means 120 to 180. That is not a small error in line handling. It is a gap big enough to change how a crew reads the entire seafloor beneath them. Either the line lied, the bottom changed, or something enormous was between the boat and the seabed. Then the fish. Fishermen do not invent abundance by accident. They know the difference between a thin drift and a sudden concentration. Pontoppidan's Kraken attracts cod and ling in numbers great enough to override caution for a few minutes. Whatever the story began as, it is tied to a real marine effect. Prey gathered over something below, something large enough or disruptive enough to stack life above it. Whales can do that. Upwelling can do that. Underwater topography can do that. But Pontoppidan's men do not describe a reef on a chart. They describe a rising presence there one moment and gone the next. Then there is 1680. Pontoppidan includes a report from Alstahaug in northern Norway. A young krake was said to have become trapped among rocks and later rotted in a narrow channel. The detail is strange for a simple reason. A trapped carcass is not a whirlpool. It is not a moving island. It is matter. Something with volume. Something that can decay. But even here, the description does not cleanly become a giant squid. Pontoppidan compared the Kraken less to the modern image we carry in our heads and more to a broad, many-armed sea thing, closer in spirit to a polyp or starfish. So the original file is already messy. One date, one place, one dead body, but no clean anatomy. A century later, the numbers change shape. In 1853, Danish zoologist Cetus Steenstrup examined the beak of a stranded cephalopod and used it to help define Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. That was the scientific pivot. The Kraken did not disappear. It narrowed. It shrank from a sea-spanning island beast into a biological candidate with tissue, beaks, tentacles, and a Latin name. But the fit was imperfect from the start. A giant squid explains arms. It explains rare encounters. It explains why the deep returns pieces instead of whole bodies. It does not neatly explain fishermen reading 20 fathoms where they expected 100, or a surface broken into island-like swells. So keep following the evidence. For most of the modern era, giant squid remained almost insultingly incomplete. Sailors reported them. Beaches received parts of them. Sperm whales came up scarred by them. But the animal itself stayed mostly off-stage. Bodies floated in damaged. Arms tore away. Measurements inflated. Legends did the rest. The longest documented total length accepted by Smithsonian runs to about 43 feet, or 13 meters. Large enough to terrify a crew at close range, but not large enough to be a literal island. One half of the myth is biological. The other half is doing something else. On September 30th, 2004, at 9:15 in the morning, off Japan's Ogasawara Islands, Tsunemi Kubodera and Kyoichi Mori got the first photographs of a living giant squid in its deep-water habitat. Not from one lucky drop, either. It took 23 deployments of a baited camera system, 23 descents into the dark before the animal finally struck. And when it did, it left behind one of the clearest pieces of evidence the deep has ever surrendered. A severed tentacle 5.5 meters long, more than 18 feet, hooked on the line and later confirmed by DNA. That is the modern Kraken in forensic form. Date, time, deployments, tissue sample, genetic confirmation. But even that victory comes back in pieces. Not the full animal spread across open water. Not a sea monster rolling like an island. A strike in the dark, a violent grab, a torn-off piece. The deep gives the proof only after breaking it. So was the Kraken a giant squid all along? The numbers say no, not cleanly. The 1853 beak and the 2004 photographs give the legend a living candidate, probably the best one we have. But Pontoppidan's 1755 Kraken is a compound creature built from several marine facts at once. Sudden shoals of fish, unstable readings of depth, rare massive bodies from below, and surface behavior men did not know how to classify in the moment. One source gave it arms. Another gave it bulk. Fear gave it scale. Print gave it authority. The Kraken survives better than simpler monsters because it sits exactly where ocean folklore becomes evidence, and evidence refuses to stay whole. One report says the bottom rose from 100 fathoms to 20. Another says a body rotted among rocks in 1680. Science adds a beak in 1853. A camera adds images in 2004. Every century gets a fragment. No century gets the entire beast. And the sharpest fact is this:
The first live giant squid ever photographed did not come ashore. It came back as an 18-foot piece. Number 1. Leviathan. What if Leviathan were true, in the most literal sense? Not a big animal, not a rare predator. Something in the water so far beyond nets, hooks, and ships that coasts stop being frontiers and become walls. Trade shrinks. Fishing turns into a military risk. Every storm line on the horizon carries the chance that something alive is moving inside it. That is the scale of the myth. Leviathan enters history when the sea stops being scenery and becomes an adversary with a face. Start with the archive. In 1928, a farmer near Ras Shamra on the Syrian coast uncovered a tomb. Archaeologists moved in and soon found the buried city of Ugarit. From that late Bronze Age ruin came 6 clay tablets preserving about 2,350 lines of a storm god cycle. On them, the sea is not neutral water. It is a hostile power. In that hostile world coils Lotan, the twisting serpent, the multi-headed creature on the side of chaos. Leviathan does not begin as a whale tale from sailors. It begins in writing, in a city that lived by the coast and knew exactly what the sea could take. Centuries later, Hebrew poets reuse the image, but they do not leave it alone, they sharpen it. In Psalm 74, Leviathan is already broken, its heads crushed, plural, not singular, like an echo of the older many-headed sea monster tradition. In Isaiah 27:1, the fight is still ahead. Leviathan is the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, the dragon in the sea, waiting for a future blow. Then Psalm 104 turns the image again. There, Leviathan is not an enemy in open revolt. It is a creature formed to move in the sea, almost playful for a moment, almost casual. Same name, different threat. The image keeps shifting because the deep never gives one clean answer. Then comes the text that made Leviathan unforgettable. Job 41 does not offer a specimen. It stages a humiliation. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Can you press down its tongue with a cord? Can you pierce its jaw? The questions stack up like a cross-examination where every answer is already known. No, absolutely not. You are supposed to feel the scale break. Human tools keep shrinking, the creature keeps growing. Its skin is shield on shield. Its teeth are terror. Its breath smokes. Sparks seem to leap from its mouth. This is not zoology in the modern sense, but it is not random. It is a forensic description of power, a body built to make harpoons and courage equally useless. Here the cold possibility starts to bite. Maybe the core of Leviathan is not, there exists one exact monster. Maybe it is, the deep contains something human power cannot domesticate. If so, the myth is doing brutally realistic work. Sailors do not need philosophy when something surfaces beside the hull. They need categories: whale, crocodile, serpent, reef, storm. Leviathan keeps blurring them. Serpent-shaped in one text, many-headed in another, sea dragon in another. Almost just animal in Psalm 104. So when people ask what it originally was, the irritating answer may be the right one. The authors may have wanted all 3 meanings at once: mythic chaos dragon, exaggerated real beast, and the total feeling of facing water that does not care whether you understand it. That blur survives long after the Bible. In the Talmud, Bava Batra 74b, Leviathan is carried all the way to the end of time. One tradition says the female was preserved for the righteous, to be served at a final banquet. It sounds absurd at first. Then the mechanism becomes clear. The impossible predator has not been explained away. It has been postponed, contained for later, saved for the last table in history. The image did not die. Tradition kept it alive. The strangest turn came in 2010, when the name rose out of the real ocean again. In Nature, researchers described a giant fossil sperm whale from Peru, dated to roughly 12 to 13 million years ago. They first called it Leviathan melvillei, after Herman Melville. Then taxonomy stepped in with bureaucratic dryness. The genus name Leviathan had already been used, so the animal became Leviathan melvillei instead. The paperwork changed, the scale did not. Its skull was about 3 meters long. Its teeth stretched over 36 centimeters, longer than a school ruler, set in a predator built to hunt large prey. Now picture the scene properly, not a medieval doodle in a manuscript.
bones on the ground. You are standing over the remains of an actual macro-predator from the Miocene, one with the jaw hardware to tear into other whales. That does not prove Job saw a fossil whale. It does not mean Isaiah had a sperm whale in mind. It does not turn Ugarit's scribes into secret naturalists. It does something more unsettling. When ancient writers reached for impossible scale, the ocean had in fact produced bodies large and violent enough to feed that imagination. Not the exact monster, not the exact text, a real candidate for the emotional truth behind it. Leviathan stands at the peak of the whole gallery. The mermaid can be mistaken identity. The sea bishop can be print culture doing what print culture does. The Kraken can be assembled from tissue, beaks, sonar confusion, and one brutal 5.5-meter fragment brought back on a line. Leviathan is larger than any single carcass because it lives where evidence and meaning fuse. A 6-tablet Bronze Age archive, biblical poems scattered across centuries, a courtroom speech in Job 41, a future banquet in rabbinic tradition, a 12-million-year-old whale from Peru renamed by taxonomic necessity. Each layer adds detail. None give you the full animal. The deep does not hand over Leviathan as a body. It hands over a recurring shape: serpent, dragon, whale, judgment, power. Ask what the deep is actually hiding here, and the answer is not a simple beast. It is the reason the same image keeps resurfacing whenever humans lose control. Hook it, cage it, name it, classify it. The texts shut each door in turn. Then Job leaves the final line on the record, less like poetry than a warning. On earth there is not his like.